Fabiano Caruana takes on Magnus Carlsen at the World Blitz 2022. These two have had always very interesting battles. They also have played a World Championship match against each other in 2018. Look at what Magnus does here. And look how he adjusts his pieces before the game, not worrying about the 6 seconds that he lost there. We have the Ruy Lopez, a6, bishop a4, and now knight to f6, castles, bishop e7, the closed Ruy Lopez, rook e1. Are we going to witness Marshall, castles, d3, that is the d3 variation, and now bishop d2, stopping knight a5 in order to win this bishop, h6, h3, and also h6 has an idea. It stops knight g5, so you can play rook e8. That's what Magnus does, a3, bishop f8, and now the knight comes here. He puts his rook on b8. These are all very natural moves in this opening. As you can see, the players are blitzing it out because they are aware of these patterns. The way in which the knight from c6 is relocated to g6 when a4 is played. You try to exchange these bishops. You take it back with the rook, ab, ab. Caruana has the open a file, but I don't think that is very relevant in this position. Black has sort of equalized out of the opening, but white's structure does look a little more solid. He plays queen to e2. I think this is where the game begins. Actually, not really. Magnus still blitzing it out because he realizes that the position is literally not very risky. You know, he pushes his pawn. If you take, he wants to bring out his queen. His bishop is now opened up. Knight is well placed. Maybe could go to f4 at some point. Caruana taking a bit of his time, trying to think what is the way he wants to react to d5. He takes, queen takes, and places his queen to e4, offering a trade of queens to Magnus. Now, Magnus can decline the trade of queens with queen c5, but then why would he want to do that? He decides to take it, and pawn takes, so that you also have space in the center. And now this is a very equal position. Rook to c6. You can feel that Magnus is kind of playing for equality. Also, the tournament situation is to his favor. c3 played here, and an interesting idea now can be d4. But first, Magnus goes f6. He solidifies his center. Maybe his knight can now move because earlier the pawn on e5 would hang. These are the small little advantages that Magnus loves to grind, and he plays b4. What he is essentially thinking is that after bishop b4, rook b4, the b2 pawn would get a bit weak, bishop c3. But now the bishop is very well protecting the pawn, bishop d6. Now that's a little weird move because I thought he would go bishop b4 and trade off the bishops. Why did he put his bishop on d6? Maybe it's just to solidify his structure here. Knight d2. Where is this knight heading to? Maybe from f1 to e3 to d5. That's what Caruana may want to do, and Magnus does the same. He wants to also get his knight from e6 to somewhere. Knight to f1 played. Well, it would be very difficult to imagine one of the players losing this position because they also have a lot of time on the clock, and the position is also very easy to play. But with Magnus, you can never really relax. He changes his mind. He gets his bishop to b4 and now asks a question to Fabi. Do you want to take? Because if you take, my rook comes in and I attack your b2 pawn. It's a small weakness that I can attack. And Caruana can feel a bit of pressure. You can realize that when the position is around equal and the opponent poses you with some problems, it's sometimes not so easy to meet them. He has some options up his sleeve. He can play rook c1. He can of course take the bishop. He can bring his other rook in. There's also an idea to just play rook a2. You don't want to lose the pawn on c3, so he goes rook c1, takes, rook takes, they trade rooks, and Magnus jumps in with rook b3. Notice how Magnus is making very good use of his time. He's still at 2 minutes, knight e6, knight to d2. Now this looks a natural move, but actually it's not good. He should have played his knight to e3, but now after knight d2, rook b2, Magnus attacks the knight. The problem starts now. One is that the knight is coming to c5, e4 is hanging, d3 is threatened. So Caruana goes knight c4, Magnus puts his rook one square diagonally to the knight. Now the knight cannot attack it easily, and as we have seen, the idea is knight c5. Suddenly the problems start to mount up. Also Caruana is 1 minute down on the clock. He goes rook d1, a very good move because you want to get active down the d file. That is the best you can do when you are under attack. And now maybe Magnus can go knight c5, attack this pawn on e4. Also he has an idea of rook c2, which could attack the pawn on c3. So there's something to choose from. You can see Magnus playing around with the pieces and plays his knight to c5. He attacks e4. What does Caruana do? Because you don't want to get passive. Once you start making moves like rook e1, that's the end of it. Rook a4 attacks here and here. It's not a good thing. You want to keep yourself active. You want to play the position. And he goes rook d2. He offers a trade of rooks. Naturally you don't want to take, because once you take knight d2, this is just equal. So he goes rook a4, knight to e3, knight takes e4, played by Carleson. He's now a pawn up, but Caruana is ready to jump in with his rook. Notice he's down to 30 seconds on the clock. So with the position being slightly difficult, Magnus also pressing on the clock. This is how an amazing blitz player plays. Now the point is, king f3, beautiful move. That's a very important defensive resource, because now he attacks the knight. You can't take on f2 because this is hanging. Also f5 is impossible. The knight takes it. And although black can take on f2 with the knight, his coordination is broken, and then the white knight moves in. And although you're 2 pawns down, g7 is attacked, c7 is attacked, and this shows why Caruana is such an amazing player. He finds the best defensive idea here with king f3. And you can see Magnus is not so happy because he wants more from the position. He wants that things somehow coordinate. But it's not so easy to make that happen. He's thinking between going knight g5 and putting his knight on e6 and taking on f2. Well, he takes it. Fabi has his move ready. Knight to f5, excellent move. g7 is hanging and he takes on h3. Now he's 3 pawns up, but Caruana takes back 1. And now will he take back the second? So yes, now he's just 1 pawn down. Also h6 is hanging and the position looks roundabout even. h5 played, trying to save that pawn. But now there are a few ways to go. Maybe one is rook c8, king f7, rook c7, king g6, knight h4 check. You can play it that way and the position is around equal. But Caruana is down to 10, 8, 7. He goes king e3. Knight to g5. Magnus there not so pleased with his position. Knight goes to d6, and a very good idea to actually trade off the knights, because then that would lead to an equalish rook endgame with the active white king. Magnus goes rook c2, and now knight e4 would have been good, but Caruana with very little time goes to f5, rook c6, king f7, and he gives a check. And there you see Magnus. Okay, that's a draw. It's a look of a man who is kind of resigned to a draw, but king g6, and this is Magnus's last ditch attempt. If he takes on h6, he's going to take on f6. So he takes on c3, king d2, and now goes back. Wow, what a move. And Caruana needs to play g4. And you can see Hikaru in the background trying to look at the game. He goes king e3, blunder. He has to play g4. Now the rook knight is trapped, and unbelievable scenes here. g4 played, Magnus takes on h6, and he has won the game because Caruana loses on time. But even the final position was just lost. He had to play g4. This was a very important moment of the game. White checked on h6 and black has moved his king to g6. Now Caruana took the knight here, and Magnus realized that if he took the knight, f6 would hang and it would be a draw. So he took here, giving a check, and after king d2, he had an option. He could take on g3 and go into a position where his opponent had a knight and he had a rook, he had 3 pawns. But instead he decided for this small little trick with rook c8. and this is where his devious trap was set. He wanted to go rook h8 and take this when he would be a clean 2 pawns up, and that's the reason why Caruana had to play g4 here. Now if you take with the king, f6 is hanging. If you go to h8 here, then I have g takes h5, and if you take h6 again, f6 hangs. If you take on h5, my knight jumps out, and somehow you're not able to keep this knight under control. So that's the reason why g4 was very accurate and necessary, but he went king e3 with very little time on the clock, which was a blunder, because now after rook h8, it's all over. There's no way to get the knight out. It is trapped, and black ends up with 2 extra pawns. In the game, he just played g4, but after rook takes h6, takes here, rook takes h5 with 2 extra pawns, white is lost.
Life is full of exciting events, but it is our first impressions that we remember best. Your first diploma, your first job in a big company,